Imagine for a moment that your mind is no longer stretched by old fears. Let your attention stop chasing what has not yet taken shape and return to the breath, expanding gently in your chest. Allow yourself to feel the quiet unfolding like a thin light, softly touching every hidden corner within you. In a world where people are often weighed down by worries and the clutter of life, where everyone carries an invisible mountain on their shoulders, there is still a truth that stands beyond time. I stepped onto this path many years ago when my own mountains felt impossible to move. I did not find answers in exhausting effort or in frantic striving. I found them only when I stopped and noticed something simple. The mountain was not out there. The mountain was within me. And from that moment, a bridge appeared. Not a bridge of stone or steel, but a bridge made of awareness born from the recognition that there is a deep strength trying to speak in each of us. I call that strength the quiet voice of Christ within. It is not loud. It does not push. It only waits for you to return. When you step onto that bridge, even with the first breath of awakening, you begin to see that the words ahead are not meant only to be read. They are meant to be felt. And when they are felt, you will see that they do not aim to explain, but to awaken. Not to persuade, but to open. I invite you into this journey not as someone seeking a miracle, but as someone remembering what they once knew. You are not here by accident. When the mind grows tired, when the heart has carried too much, when life urges you to seek another way, it is often a sign that the inner world is preparing to shift. And when the inner world shifts, the mountain begins to move. Let these words touch you like water flowing over a stone. Slow, steady, yet strong enough to change even the hardest shape. I have seen people who thought they could never rise stand again. I have seen hearts that seemed hardened become soft and new. I have seen mountains that looked unshakable tremble because a single true thought was placed in the right place. And I believe the same can happen for you. Not by your own strength, but by the strength of the one who lives within you. When I began observing my life with quiet awareness instead of reacting in haste, I slowly noticed something I had never seen before. The things that drained me had never come from the outside world. They came from the images that had lived too long in my mind. Each person carries a mountain like that. Some call it circumstance, some call it fate, some accept it as something unchangeable. But I learned that no mountain is made of stone without first being formed by a silent belief. A mountain is only a thought that has been solidified over the years. It carries the shape of conclusions we made when we were young. It carries the voice of those who once planted seemingly harmless phrases in us, such as "that is enough," or "you cannot do more than that." It carries the shadow of fears we never named. And because we have never looked at it with light, we think it is something real. In my early years of teaching, I met many people who believed they were being suffocated by their circumstances. But when I sat with them in stillness, I realized the circumstance was only a shadow. A shadow has no power when the light is turned on. The mountain does not exist outside. It exists in the way we see and the patterns we unknowingly feed. I remember an evening long ago when a young man came to see me exhausted. He said everything felt overwhelming from work to family. He felt pushed into a corner as if an invisible pressure was blocking his life. He did not realize that he had been feeding that pressure with a picture repeated over and over in his mind. When I asked him what he believed about himself, he stayed silent for a long time. Then softly he said, "I think I am not good enough." Not enough is one of the biggest mountains humans face yet. Few know where it begins. As children, a single glance, a single comment, a moment of comparison is enough to plant a seed. Years pass, and we no longer remember where the seed came from, but we sit in the shadow of what has grown from it. That is how mountains form. They grow in the dark and disappear only when we bring them into the light. I told him what I had seen many times, that no one changes while they still see their problem as something out of reach. Transformation begins the moment we acknowledge that the mountain lies in how we think, how we believe, how we see ourselves. Not to blame, but to free. I asked him to do something very small, yet very powerful. Pause for a moment of stillness and listen to the sentence repeating inside him. Not the sentence he says out loud, but the sentence he believes, because that sentence shapes every step he takes. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, his face softened. He said, "I heard it." The sentence was, "I cannot change anything." That was his mountain. Not the heavy workload, not the demands of family, not the overwhelm of life. All of those were only effects of an old belief that had not been examined. I asked him to say it again, not to affirm it, but to free it from the hidden authority it held. He repeated it this time not with despair, but with awareness. Then I told him what I tell myself in difficult seasons. When you see the mountain clearly, it begins to shake. What makes it big is not its nature, but the blur around it. A shadow in the dark always looks more frightening than when the light is turned on. In that moment of understanding, the whole space felt lighter. I felt it too because I had once walked through the same inner opening. The mountain does not move because you push it. It moves when you see its true form, when you realize it is not stone, but image. And an image exists only when we keep projecting fear onto it. After that conversation, the young man began each morning by naming his fear instead of running from it. He did not fight it or try to drive it away. He placed it under the light of awareness and said, "I see you, and you are no longer my master." A week later, he wrote to me saying the pressure inside him had dropped by half, even though nothing outside had changed. That is the law of the inner life, a law I have witnessed many times. A mountain does not begin to move from the outside. It moves the moment the one who looks at it stops fearing it. And you hearing these words may also be carrying a mountain like that. Maybe you cannot name it yet. Maybe you only feel its weight. But I want you to know that your listening is a sign that your inner world is already shifting. Because none of us seeks quietness unless the mountain has already begun to tremble. I want to ask you something so you can feel your own presence. What mountain within you is asking to be seen, to be named, to step out of the darkness of silence? Thank you for being here and for facing this moment with me. Across many years of observing human life and my own life, I slowly came to understand a simple yet powerful truth. Nothing in this world stays still when the words of a human being begin to carry the weight of awareness. Thought is a seed, but speech is the hand of the sower. When you speak something with a quiet belief inside you, you place the first stone in the foundation of your reality. People often see words as a tool for communication, but very few see that words are a tool for creation. I am not speaking about the impulsive words spoken in anger, not about polite phrases, not about words used to hide true feelings. I am speaking about the sentences that slip out when the mind has already formed a conclusion without you noticing. Those are pronouncements. And those pronouncements give shape to the mountain. Many think that change begins with action, with effort, with working harder. But the truth is gentler. Every action begins with an image in the mind, and that image is strengthened each time we repeat a statement, whether whispered or spoken aloud. I once met a man named Samuel, hardworking, kind, dedicated, yet for many years he felt that life kept passing him by. He worked tirelessly, but always sighed. When I asked what he truly believed about his own efforts, he hesitated and said, "I guess I do not think my work will ever be recognized." I told him the truth, that he did not only believe that. He had said that to himself hundreds of times, and each time he said it, he added another layer of soil to an old mountain. When we say, "I am never understood, I am always forgotten, I cannot change this," we are calling a false reality into solid shape. When we say, "I have no choice, I just have to endure," we grant power to a shadow that has no real force. But when we begin to speak differently, not out of pressure, but out of awareness, we do something quiet, yet far-reaching. We turn the heart in a new direction. When the heart changes direction, life changes form. Some say to me, "I have tried speaking positively, but it does not work." I smile because I understand. Words have no power when they are only sound. They have power only when they reflect a mind that is awake. You may speak thousands of beautiful affirmations, but if your heart is trembling with fear, those words are only gentle knocks on a closed door. But if you speak a single sentence with clarity, without rushing, without anxiety, simply as someone stating what they know to be true, that sentence becomes a command. The command is handed to the subconscious, and the subconscious carries it out. I remember a moment in my own life when I saw this truth, as if someone had opened a door I never knew existed. I was facing a challenge that felt too big. I sat in silence for a long time, then spoke a sentence so simple that I wondered why I had never said it before. It was, "I allow truth to guide me." That was all. No forcing, no proving, no demanding results. And from that moment, events began to shift in ways I could never have created on my own strength. Your words can open a path where no path seems possible, but only when you speak from the place within that knows you are not alone, the place where your soul recognizes a higher principle flowing through you, waiting to be used. When you speak from fear, you give shape to fear. When you speak from discouragement, you deepen the imprint of disappointment in the mind. But when you speak with awareness, even the smallest spark of it, knowing you speak from truth and not from a wounded self, your words become a doorway. The doorway guides the energy of the mind back into alignment. And alignment is what every soul longs for. I have seen lives change when a single inner sentence was replaced. A woman once told me, "I am always alone." When she stopped repeating that sentence and replaced it with, "I am ready for love to find me without pressure," without rushing, a few months later, she entered the first healthy relationship of her life. A man once said, "My health is always weak." He changed it to, "My body knows how to recover day by day," and slowly his strength returned. Not magic, not fantasy, only the natural law of thought at work. I share these stories not to convince you, but to remind you of something deeper, that your words are not meaningless, that every word you speak is a seed, that every seed seeks to grow, and your life is the garden planted by the sentences you have spoken the most. So before you try to change your circumstances, listen to how you are speaking about them. Before you try to fix your life, listen to the voice you use to describe yourself. Because you cannot move a mountain with your hands, but you can move it with your pronouncement. And that pronouncement begins the moment you know you are speaking from a place higher than fear. Now I want to ask you something. Not to answer me, but to answer yourself. What sentence are you repeating the most in your mind without noticing? And is that sentence building the mountain or freeing you from it? If you see it today, I thank you for the honesty to look within in a way not everyone dares to do. Across the long years of observing the movement of the human mind, I came to see something that looks simple, yet is the beginning of every real change. Is the ability to call the mountain by its true name. Many people move through life without ever knowing that what exhausts them most does not come from big events, but from small images buried deep in their inner world, from old memories, from passing words in childhood, from moments of helplessness they never once named. A mountain is not dangerous because it is large. It is dangerous because it is hidden. I often tell those who come to me that you cannot change something you cannot touch, and you cannot touch something you have not named. Recognition is the first light that enters the dark. Light does not fight darkness. It only needs to be present. When I look back at the most difficult seasons of my life, I see that the pain did not come from the situation, but from confusion, from not understanding why I reacted the way I did, why I felt afraid, why I shrank back from things that seemed harmless. I was like someone walking at night without knowing they were stepping through their own shadow. When I realized that every painful feeling has an image behind it, a conclusion I once accepted, a belief I had attached to my soul without questioning, that was the moment I knew the real healing had begun. Once during a small gathering, someone asked me what the mountain truly is. I answered gently that the mountain is the old story you keep telling yourself, even when it no longer fits who you are. It is the quiet story inside that says, I am not loved. I am not safe. I do not deserve to move forward. I cannot change anything. I have heard these sentences from many people, and I once said them to myself too. When repeated too often, they harden into shape and become a wall. A man named Jacob once came to me in despair. He said, I cannot feel myself anymore. I do not know what I am doing wrong. I only feel like something keeps pushing me off the path of life. I told him I was not concerned with what was happening outside. I only cared about what he believed was happening. Because that is the mountain. I invited him to sit down and asked him to speak the sentence he feared most when he thought about himself. He looked at me for a long time, then released a breath he had been holding for years. He said, I think I do not deserve peace. I knew then that his mountain was not conflict or lack or recent failure. His mountain was that sentence. One sentence can imprison a person for a lifetime. When I asked him to repeat it again, not to believe it, but to see it, he cried. Not from pain, but from the recognition that the sentence was never true. It was only a conclusion he made when he was too young to understand that life does not always know how to love us in the right way. That is the miracle of recognition. When you look at the mountain directly, not with judgment, but with honesty, you see that it is much smaller than you imagined. What made it seem large was the fact that you turned away from it for too long. When we avoid fear, fear learns to disguise itself as power. When we face it, that power evaporates like mist. I have spent many years teaching this simple way. No complex analysis, no long search for distant causes, only a moment to pause and ask a deep question life never taught us to ask. Why am I afraid of this? Or why do I keep repeating this pattern? When the answer comes often soft and quiet, it feels like someone lighting a small candle in a dark room. One small flame can illuminate the whole space. One realization can bring down the entire mountain. I once met a woman who carried insecurity for decades. She said her outer life was not unstable, yet she always felt she was about to lose something, about to be abandoned, about to be hurt. When I asked what image appeared in her mind when fear arose, She spoke a sentence that had waited many years to be spoken. She said, "I always see myself standing at a door and no one opens it for me." That image was her mountain. Not the people in her life, not the events, but the picture of a closed door she carried within. I told her to recognize that image, not as truth, but as something repeated for too long. When she understood that her tears came not from pain, but from release. What is seen clearly loses its old power. That is the beauty of recognition. It requires no force, only light. I want you to understand that you do not need to fight your mountain. You do not need to break it, conquer it, or overcome it. You only need to see it clearly with the light of awareness. Your mountain may be a sentence you repeat unconsciously, an image from childhood, a feeling of being left behind, a fear of not being enough, or a belief that you cannot have the life you quietly long for. But remember this: what is recognized will be released, and what is named will begin to dissolve. I want to invite you to pause right now in the very moment you are reading or hearing these words and ask one small yet powerful question. What mountain in me is waiting to be seen? Let the answer come as gently as a breath. When you recognize it, you have already walked half the journey of healing. Because light always arrives before transformation. Through the many years of walking alongside people, I have met countless souls who seemed exhausted, not because they lacked strength, but because they carried a mountain they did not know they had been feeding all their lives. And like you, they did not need complex teachings. They only needed a moment to look back, a small pause to see something that had been there for a very long time. One of the people I remember most deeply was Andrew, a man who lived fully in his responsibilities, always placing his family and colleagues before himself, yet always feeling small in front of life. He had the calm presence of someone used to carrying weight, but his eyes held a quiet tiredness that no words could hide. When I first met him, I asked him gently what hurt him the most. He did not answer immediately. He looked down at his hands as if searching for the memory of himself. Finally, he said, "I feel like I am not enough. No matter what I do, I feel like something is missing for me to feel safe, respected, and at peace." I knew his mountain was inside that sentence. Not enough was a pronouncement he had repeated to himself so many times that it had become a stone lodged inside his heart. The sense of lack was not in his situation. It was in the inner image that had been shrinking him through old words, old memories, old voices that once taught him to live small, to stay safe. I told him that what he carried was not truth, but an unconscious pattern. A pattern that needed no blame, only recognition. Then I guided him through the first practice I often give to those learning to step out of the shadowed corners of their mind. I asked him to set aside a few minutes each day and write one simple sentence. "I am a perfect channel of worth and peace." I wanted him to write it, not as a mantra, but as a reminder for the mind to know it was reshaping itself. I also told him something important. Each time the old voice whispered, "I am not enough," he had to answer softly but firmly, "I do not belong to that old image anymore." For 3 weeks, Andrew practiced this faithfully. On the 7th day, he said the tightness in his chest had eased. On the 13th day, he said meetings where he usually shrank back suddenly felt easier, as if he was taking up space that had always been his. On the 17th day, he received an invitation to join a major project at work, something he had always thought was reserved for others, more confident, more capable. But the most important thing was not the project. It was the new voice rising inside him. And that voice no longer whispered that he lacked. It said he was worthy. I have seen this happen too many times to call it coincidence. When a person changes their inner image, the outer world rearranges itself. Not because circumstances are magical, but because the mind stops sending out fear and begins sending out self-acceptance. I told Andrew that he had not become a new person. He was simply returning to himself, the self he had forgotten under the demands and pressures of life. When he understood that the heaviness in his face softened, he no longer needed anyone to give him permission to exist. He only needed to give himself permission to trust his inherent worth. And that was when his mountain began to tremble. What happened to Andrew can happen to you. Not because he was special, but because the laws of the mind do not exclude anyone. The mind always responds to the image it holds most tightly. If the image is small, life contracts. If the image is open, life makes room. I want you to pause now and sense whether deep within you there is a sentence like the one Andrew carried. A sentence you have never spoken aloud yet. It still quietly guides you into choices smaller than who you truly are. If it rises, do not fear it. Do not push it away. Just look at it and say what Andrew said, I do not belong to that old image anymore. That is the moment you begin rewriting the blueprint of your life. Before we end this part, I want to invite you to take one small action with great power. Leave a comment, even if it is just, I am ready to change, or simply the number 1. Not for me to know, but for you to know that you have taken a step beyond the invisible mountain you once believed you could not cross. From very early in my spiritual journey, I realized that people often look toward the sky for help, yet forget that the strength they seek is not far away. It lives in the very words they speak each day. And there is a profound difference between a plea and a decree. The difference is like the one between a person standing before a closed door hoping it might open and a person placing their hand on the handle and turning it. Both want to enter, but only one understands they have the right to do so. When I speak about decree, many think I am encouraging force. But the truth is the complete opposite. A decree does not come from tension, effort, or the desire to control. It comes from stillness. It comes from knowing you do not speak from a fragile self, but from the principle alive within you. I once told a group of people that a plea is the voice of someone who sees their problem as larger than themselves, while a decree is the voice of someone who sees truth as larger than the problem. The difference lies in where the consciousness stands. When you plead, you stand beneath the mountain, looking up at it, feeling its size, hoping some power outside yourself will lift you over it. But when you decree, you no longer stand at the bottom. You stand on the ground of spirit, where no image can make you small. From that place, the mountain has no authority. I remember a woman who came to me burdened by her son's struggle with addiction. She had prayed countless times, yet everything seemed to worsen. When I asked how she had been praying, she sighed and said, I asked God to save him because I know I cannot. I looked at her gently and said she was right, that she could not, but she had forgotten the most important thing. She was not invited to beg. She was invited to declare. She was not asked to plead. She was asked to stand on truth. I asked what she truly believed about her son. She said, I think he is already lost. I told her that was her real decree, not the prayer. That belief, he is lost, was what allowed the mountain to remain. I guided her into a practice I have done many times in my own life. I told her that, before she thought of her son, she should be silent for a few seconds, place her hand on her chest and speak one simple sentence filled with truth. I acknowledge that the light of life is in my Son." And I told her to speak it, not as someone begging for hope, but as someone declaring truth. In the weeks that followed, she practiced this faithfully. Some days she cried because the old despair tried to pull her back. But each time she reminded herself she was not speaking from fear, but from the truth that the life of God was moving in her Son. What happened next was not miraculous in a mystical sense. It was simply the law working as it always does. Her Son began to regain clarity, not instantly, but enough to begin treatment. The mother wrote to me long after and said something I never forgot. "I understand now. It was not my words that saved my son. It was the consciousness from which I spoke." That is the essence of decree. It does not lie in volume or quantity or desperation. It lies in the place within the speaker. When you speak from fear, you strengthen fear. When you speak from smallness, you strengthen smallness. When you speak from despair, you make the mountain taller. But when you speak from inner stillness, from the place where you know that an unchanging principle flows through you, then you are issuing a decree. Because a decree does not come from the human self. A decree comes from truth. Over the years, I have tried many ways to explain this, and finally realized one image is the clearest. Imagine you are standing before a body of water. If your mind is chaotic and you throw stones randomly, the surface breaks into disorder. But if you stand still and look at the water, as if you already know it will reflect what you speak, even a single gentle touch creates ripples that widen in perfect circles. That is how a decree works. It does not need strength. It needs alignment. Alignment between your mind and the truth within you. Another time I met a man struggling endlessly in his work. He said, "I am doing everything I can, but nothing opens." I asked what he was saying inside. He said, "Life never works in my favor." I told him that was his true decree. And if he wanted things to change, he had to stand in a completely different position. I instructed him to sit still for 3 minutes each morning and speak one sentence from that stillness. "I declare that the law of goodness is at work in my life." He said it every day, and after 2 weeks, the thing he called life never works for me began to shift. Not because the world changed, but because the voice inside him changed its position. I want you to understand something with all the gentleness and certainty of spirit. You are never powerless. You are only speaking from a place lower than your truth. And when you change the place from which your words arise, life changes its shape in response. Because your words are not only sound, they are power moving through the deep places of your soul, aligned with the truth you acknowledge. And that is a decree. Among all the truths I have discovered on my spiritual path, nothing is as powerful and as subtle as the words "I am." They are so simple that people often overlook them, yet so authoritative that your entire life turns in the direction of whatever you place after them. When I first understood the depth of "I am," it felt as if I had found the key to a door I'd been standing before my whole life without knowing it. I am is not a phrase, not an ordinary affirmation, not a mystical idea passed around. I am is the declaration of truth within you. When you say "I am," you touch the sacred center of your being, the place untouched by fear, untouched by trembling, untouched by bargaining, untouched by circumstance. I am is the voice of spirit living inside you. It is not the voice of personality, not the echo of memory, not the imprint of past experiences. It is the voice of the life source in you. And whatever follows those two words becomes a creative command. Through many years of observation, I came to see something human and profound. People rarely say, "I am with awareness." They say it when sad, when tired, when discouraged, when lonely, when longing to be loved, when feeling left behind. They say, "I am weak. I am not good enough. I am someone who never gets chosen. I am someone who lives in fear." And each time they say it, even silently, they lay down another brick for the mountain they think they cannot cross. Watch yourself. Notice what you say when you are tense. Notice what you say when you try to comfort yourself. Notice which "I am" rises in you when you feel hurt. Those statements build invisible walls around your life. But here is the beauty. If you can say "I am" and build a wall, then you can also say "I am" and open a door. "I am" does not discriminate. It only creates according to what follows it. When you say "I am peace," not because you feel peaceful, but because you choose peace as your truth, "I am" becomes a lamp. When you say "I am strong," not because you are strong, but because you accept the power within that longs to move, "I am" becomes a current. When you say "I am worthy," "I am abundant," "I am light," those words are not comfort. They are decrees. They bring the mind into alignment. They loosen the grip of old images. They make even the mountains you once saw as destiny begin to move. I remember a man named Richard, a successful businessman, carrying a deep emptiness. He said that despite his achievements, he always felt lost, as if he were standing outside his own life. I knew his struggle was not in what he had done, but in the sentence he had repeated to himself for years. He told me, "I always feel like I do not truly belong anywhere." I told him he did not need a new strategy, a new goal, or a major life change. He only needed to change his "I am." I guided him each morning to place his hand on his heart, close his eyes, and speak slowly, "I am the life returning to itself. I am the child of the light source. I am the one standing in my true place." After a few weeks, he told me something remarkable. He felt as if he was stepping into his life for the first time with his own feet. He did not change jobs, did not move houses, did not make sudden decisions, but the feeling of not belonging disappeared. Because that feeling had never belonged to him. It belonged to the old "I am" he had believed. And when that "I am" changed, the feeling changed. The whole life changed. People often ask if they must fully believe the "I am" before they say it. I smile. Belief is the result, not the requirement. You do not need full belief to begin. You only need willingness to let the truth in you speak. When you repeat an "I am" with inner quiet, it slowly moves into the subconscious. Then one day you hear it echo back without effort. That is when it becomes a new reality. The mind will take care of the rest. For this reason, I always suggest a small morning practice, not to change circumstances instantly, but to set the spiritual tone of your day. You do not need much. Just 3 deep breaths and one "I am" you choose to live by today. I am peace. I am clarity. I am guided. I am abundant. I am the one who carries light into this world. Say it as someone placing a key into a lock. Not rushing, not straining, not doubting. Simply as someone who knows they are activating something real. Then let the mind follow. I have lived long enough to know that life changes not by the power of circumstances, but by the power of the sentences people repeat to themselves. And among all the sentences they can speak, none is more powerful than the one that begins with "I am." If you learn to use those two words rightly, you will no longer fear mountains. Because someone who knows who they are cannot be stopped by the false images in the mind. From here, your journey begins to enter deeper ground, where your words, your thoughts, and your inner nature flow as one single stream of light. And that very stream will continue to move mountains. I have lived long enough to see that people often fear silence more than they fear truth. Perhaps because in silence, everything we try to bury under busyness, noise, and activity begins to rise again. Yet that rising is the greatest gift the Spirit can offer us. In the journey of moving mountains, no stage is more delicate than the moment you learn to sit still and hear what your heart has been trying to say for years. I once thought silence was emptiness. But the deeper I went into the inner life, the more I realized silence is not a void. Silence is a door that opens into a land we abandoned long ago. And in that land flows a stream of clear water. That stream is truth. And the mud covering it is unconscious doubt. People often think doubt is loud, filled with questions and confusion. But true doubt, the strongest doubt, is not loud. It is quiet. It is patient. It lives deep in a place we rarely touch. And precisely because it is quiet, it works more powerfully than any shout in the mind. You may speak hundreds of affirmations, write prayers, remind yourself to believe, but if in that silent place you still hold an old image, an unseen wound, a false conclusion about yourself, the mountain will remain unmoved. I remember once teaching a small group when a woman asked a direct question. She said, "I have prayed, I have affirmed, I have believed, but nothing changes. Why?" I looked at her gently and said something I had learned through many difficult lessons. I told her she had believed with her mouth, but not with her heart. She used consciousness to try to control the outcome, but in the deeper layers she was still holding the old image. And that old image was stronger than all her efforts. She sat in silence for a long time. Then she said something I have heard many people express in different forms. She said, "I am afraid that if I stop trying, everything will fall apart." I told her that was unconscious doubt. It did not shout. It whispered. It did not make noise. It stood there quietly like a closed door without a sound. And silence is the only way to see that door. People think that to overcome doubt, they must suppress it, fight it, or try harder to think positively. But doubt does not dissolve through force. It dissolves through awareness. Doubt is darkness in a room without light. And silence is the hand that turns on the switch. When you sit still, not to control anything, but to make space for truth to speak, you hear what the noisy mind never lets you hear. You hear the story. And from that moment, you can finally replace that story. I often guide those who study with me into a very gentle but powerful practice. I tell them to choose a moment each day to sit in stillness, just for a few minutes, and not to think of anything grand. Just breathe and allow the mind to reveal what it is truly holding. They often ask how to recognize doubt. I answer that you will know when you hear a sentence that contradicts what you have been praying for. For example, you say, "I am peace," but deep in silence, a small voice says, "I do not deserve it." You affirm, "I am abundant," but in silence, an old feeling whispers, "I will lose everything again." You pray for healing, but the deeper layer says, "I cannot escape this." These voices are not truth. They are simply old images, not yet replaced. And silence is where you recognize them. Once you see them, they weaken. Truth does not need to defeat falsehood. It only needs to be seen. What I love most about silence is that it never judges you. Silence does not say you are wrong, you are failing, or you have carried doubt too long. It simply opens the door and says, look at this under the light. And when you look, you see that doubt is not the enemy. It is just an image waiting to be healed. It is a part of the mind that needs to be replaced by the right image. And when you are ready, into which you imprint the truth. Let me tell you a story. A man once came to me in deep confusion. He said everything he tried to build had collapsed. He affirmed, he prayed, he spoke. I am statements, yet life remained still. When I asked him to sit quietly and listen, he did not understand why. But he obeyed. In that silence, a sentence rose in his mind that he never expected. It said, I do not believe I am allowed to change. When he spoke that sentence out loud, not with despair, but with recognition, I knew he had unlocked the first gate. Because recognition is the light. When you can say, I do not believe, that is when belief can begin. When you can say, I am afraid, that is when peace finds its way in. When you can acknowledge I am holding an old image, that image instantly loses its authority. Over time, he learned to use silence as a place to wash away the false image, a place to replace doubt with acceptance, a place to hear truth instead of the echo of the past. I want you to understand this with your whole heart. Silence is not where you become weaker. Silence is where you return. And when you return, the mountain begins to move. Not because you push it, but because you no longer feed the image that keeps it standing. In silence, doubt becomes a teacher. Fear becomes a signal. And truth becomes the foundation. Once the foundation is right, the mountain cannot stay where it is. In the years I have spent observing human life through the eyes of spirit, rather than emotional reaction, I have come to see that nothing in this world can appear unless it first exists as an image in the mind. People often believe that circumstances are the cause, that the outside world is where everything begins. But the truth is the exact opposite. Circumstances are only effects. The outer world is only a mirror. The cause never lies outside a person. It lies in the spiritual pattern they carry within. I still remember the moment I understood this, not through logic, but through a deep, intuitive knowing. I was taking a quiet walk one afternoon when I saw my shadow stretching across the ground. It changed with every step I took, with the light, with the angle. And the truth of it was so simple that it nearly stopped me in my tracks. I realized that the shadow could not decide my shape. It only reflected what was already there. The world works the same way. It reflects what you carry. When I began teaching this, many people found it difficult to accept. They would ask, does that mean the losses, the wounds, the broken places I lived through, all came from something inside me? I always answered gently, it is not your fault, but it is your pattern. A pattern is not an intentional choice. It forms from conclusions you made when you were too young to know the difference between truth and temporary experience. A harsh word, a moment of lack, a childhood failure, a time of being forgotten, all create images you no longer remember, yet the mind still holds them. Those images begin shaping how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see life. They become a mold, and nothing can be cast outside the mold that forms it. The mental pattern is the blueprint of your life. You cannot live in peace if you still hold the image that you are always under threat. You cannot have healthy love if your inner pattern still says you are not worthy of being cherished. You cannot have lasting success if the image within whispers that you will fail like before. And the more you try to change the circumstance without changing the pattern, the more it feels like pushing on a door that is locked from the inside. The power of the mental pattern lies in how quietly it operates. But precisely because it operates quietly, you can replace it with a new pattern when you know how. I once met a man named William, a dedicated worker who constantly struggled with health issues. He moved from doctor to doctor, and while each treatment helped a little, the condition always returned, as if an unseen hand pulled him back into the old state. When I asked what he believed about his body, he looked at me for a long time and said, "I think it has always been weak." And in that moment, I knew this was his pattern. Not that his body was weak, but that the image of weakness had been repeated so long in his mind that it became a mold. And a mold creates form. I told him something he did not believe at first. I said he did not need to try to become strong. He only needed to build a new image of health, because the new image would naturally shape a new experience. I guided him through a simple practice. Each morning and night, close your eyes and imagine your body functioning like a perfect system. No forcing, no strain, just observing it, as if watching a calm, steady, pure stream flow. And I told him to repeat one gentle, "I am" statement. I am the life force moving fully within me. Not to convince the body, but to reset the pattern. Some days he struggled to believe it. Some days the old fear returned. But he kept holding the new image. And I witnessed something that was not mystical but completely orderly. After a few weeks, his symptoms eased. After a few months, the doctor confirmed real improvement. And at some point, he even forgot that he once believed his body was weak. That is the power of the mental pattern. What you repeat becomes what you live, and what you live becomes what you see. I have seen this across every area of life, in finances, health, relationships, work, and the search for meaning. People do not change when they try to change their circumstances. They change when they change their mold, and the new mold is the spiritual image they accept as truth. What I want you to understand is that you do not need to create something new. You only need to accept a new image. That image, when repeated with quiet trust, will open the way on its own. And when the mold changes, the mountain begins to move. Life never resists a person who has changed their mental pattern. Never. Before we close this part, I want to ask you one thing. Not to answer me, but to hear yourself. What image inside you is shaping the life you are living? And are you willing to choose a new mold for yourself? Thank you for being here on this journey. Through many years of working with the human mind and spirit, I discovered something people often overlook, yet it carries a transformative power deeper than they imagine. It is the practice of recording your inner journey. Many people pray often, affirm often, dream often, but they record nothing. Their mind becomes like an open garden where the wind can blow the seeds away at any moment. But I learned that the moment you put pen to paper and write down the truth, you are becoming aware of that truth, becomes sharp, strong, and clearly formed in your consciousness. I remember one morning in the early years of my path. I was struggling with a nameless worry, a vague sensation as if I were being pulled by old images. I could not understand why the worry appeared, nor how to remove it. But what happened next changed my spiritual life forever. I picked up a piece of paper with no special intention and simply wrote the question, "What am I afraid of?" When I finished writing, I suddenly saw that my fear was not a wall, but only a shadow. It had grown only because I had not looked at it directly. Writing it down felt like shining light into a corner I had ignored for too long. And within minutes that fear dissolved by half, even though all I did was name it. From that day on, I understood that writing is the highest form of focused awareness. It forces you to see what is truly operating in you and prevents it from slipping back into the unconscious. This is why, when I meet people who have struggled for years with the mountains in their mind, I always ask them one simple question. Are you writing down what is happening inside you? Many shake their heads. They say they think about it a lot, analyze it, reflect on it, pray over it. But thinking is not seeing. Reflecting is not clarifying. And prayer does not replace accurate awareness of what is blocking you. I often say that writing down a truth is like anchoring a new stake into the soil of your soul. It tells the subconscious that you are serious, that you have chosen to face what needs to be released, that you are no longer running away. Once I worked with a woman named Helen. When I asked her about the mountain she carried, she said the feeling of insecurity always followed her, but she could not identify when it began. I told her to spend a week recording every moment the insecurity appeared. No long paragraphs needed. Just answer 3 questions. What am I feeling? What do I believe about myself right now? And what image appears in my mind in this moment? The first time she did this, she told me she cried. Not because the pain grew stronger, but because for the first time, she saw the true cause. In every note, the repeated pattern was not her circumstances, but the image of herself standing on the outside, not belonging anywhere. I told her that was the root, and because it was written down, it no longer hid in the dark. Once seen, it lost half its power. Helen continued journaling, but added one more step. Every time the old image appeared, she wrote beneath it, and one more sentence, I accept the new image of myself. She thought it was too simple to work, but within weeks she became more aware of her emotions. When insecurity arose, it no longer pulled her into a spiral. She had a place to stand, a new anchor, because she had taken back the authority from the old image. I have seen this too many times to call it coincidence. A spiritual journal does not merely store words. It anchors the moments when something in you shifts. It becomes evidence of progress. It becomes confirmation that you are moving in the right direction. And more importantly, it becomes the truest mirror reflecting your entire journey. I encourage people not only to record fear or doubt, but also the small moments when they feel something shift inside. When an old belief suddenly weakens. When a new image appears. When you do something you once avoided. When you feel lighter, even though your circumstances are the same. Each small sign is proof that the mountain is shaking. And when you write it down, you drive a new stake into the ground of your being, saying, "This is where I walked through." Sometimes I look back at the old pages of my life. I see mountains I thought were impossible to cross now dissolved like morning mist. I see worries that once felt unbearable now without weight. And these pages remind me of a truth I want to offer you today. No mountain can stand before a mind that documents its own awakening. A spiritual journal is not a habit. It is a ritual of becoming. It is how you touch your healing process with your own hands. It is how you turn the unconscious into an ally instead of a locked door. And most of all, it shows you that you are not walking in the dark. You are walking a path marked by footprints, evidence, and light from the things you have already overcome. When you know you have crossed before you know you can cross again. And there is no support more powerful than that. In all the years I have taught about the law of the mind, there is something I always tell those who come seeking guidance. They do not need to look far for strength. They do not need to wait for a special event. They do not need to beg for anyone's intervention. Everything they need is already within them. Yet most people live their entire lives without ever touching that inner power. They stand before their mountain with fear, with doubt, with a sense of smallness, and then they believe that weight is their destiny. But the truth is the opposite. The mountain does not require you to be stronger than it. It only requires you to be more awake than the image you hold about yourself. And once you stand in that truth, every shadow retreats on its own. I remember a man who once came to me with deep worry on his face. He said he had done everything, tried his best, lived kindly, worked hard, yet life still pushed against him. He said with exhaustion in his voice that he felt God had forgotten him. I did not rush to comfort him. I simply asked one question: what do you believe about yourself right now? He sat in silence for a long time. Then, with a voice almost too soft to hear, he said, I think I am not good enough to be helped. And I knew that was the root. Not the circumstance, not the challenge, not luck or misfortune. It was that one sentence, I am not good enough. I told him gently but firmly that he was believing something that had never been true. I told him that no one in this life is created under a lesser standard, that no one is destined to be overlooked, and that God never withdraws from a soul longing to return. What he felt was not the absence of God. It was the presence of a false image he had held too tightly, and when he believed he was unworthy of help, life arranged itself around that belief. I taught him a simple practice with the power to break the root of self-diminishing he had carried for years. I told him to stand in front of the mirror, each morning look into his own eyes, and say slowly, I am a part of the sacred life. I am worthy of the best. I am a channel of love and wisdom. At first he felt foolish, felt as though he were lying. I smiled and told him that was only the resistance of the old image. The old image always reacts when it is about to be replaced. But if he stayed committed, the pattern would begin to crack. And when it cracks, light enters. He continued the practice. Some mornings he cried while saying, I am worthy, because that sentence revealed how many years he had denied himself. But day by day he felt lighter. He said it felt like a warm river flowing inside him, as if something was lifting him from within, rather than from the outside. One afternoon he came to see me and said that somehow work had begun to move smoothly. People were listening to him, respecting him. Opportunities appeared without him chasing them. He said he could not understand how life could change so quickly. I told him life did not change first. He changed first. Life only reflected the new truth he had accepted. And that is the nature of inner power. You do not need force to change the world. You only need to place yourself back in truth. When you stand in the right place, everything adjusts around you. I told him, and I tell you now, that you did not come into this world to live as someone asking for permission. You came to live as someone entrusted with authority. Not authority over others, but the authority to stand in your own light. The authority to believe in your unshakable worth. The authority to accept the goodness waiting to express itself. The authority to step out of the old image and say, I am not that anymore. I am something higher. You do not need to do more to deserve the good. You only need to pause and look toward the place where real power lives in you and say you are ready. When you do that, you have already taken half a step out of your mountain. The remaining half spirit will take with you. Before we close this chapter, I invite you into a small but meaningful act. Leave a comment to awaken your own mind, even if it is just the word yes, or a simple sentence like I am worthy of good things. Not for me to hear it, but for you to hear the new voice rising within you. Through all the years I have guided and observed the awakening of so many lives, I came to understand a truth that my younger self never saw. When you have moved a mountain in your own life, your responsibility does not end there. In fact, that is only the beginning of a sacred invitation, a quiet yet powerful calling for you to become a light for someone else. Not so you may stand above them, but so you may remind them that the same light also within them, waiting to wake. I have met many people who first came to me with fear in their eyes and heaviness in their hearts. But when they began to understand the law of the mind, when they began to see their own truth, when they began to speak the right I am from within, when they finally moved their own mountain, I saw something new appear in their gaze. It was not pride. It was not the arrogance of someone who survived hardship. It was gratitude. And gratitude has a special nature. It never stays inside one person. It wants to flow. It wants to find another soul in the dark and whisper, I was there once, and you do not need to stay there anymore. I believe this is one of the most beautiful moments a human being can experience, when the pain that once brought them down becomes the bridge that lets them understand others more deeply. They no longer teach with words. They teach with presence. They no longer try to convince others to believe. They simply live in belief, and that alone makes others ask whether they too can change. In one of my gatherings, a woman once stood up and said she had always seen herself as a failure in every part of her life. But after learning to recognize her old image, after learning to decree from inner truth, after learning to say, I am according to her spiritual nature, she felt as if a door had opened. She said the thing she was most grateful for was not the shift in circumstances, but the ability to see others in their pain. She said, I no longer look at anyone with contempt. I also no longer look at anyone with pity. I look with understanding. I told her that was the beginning of transmission. The healed person is not the one who preaches. It is the one who knows how to be silent at the right time. The one who knows how to listen. The one who does not use spiritual law to judge, but to lift. Spirit does not call you to stand on a stage. Spirit calls you to stand in your truth and let your light spread without effort. I have seen many souls who, after breaking free from their invisible chains, became naturally gentler. They no longer try to prove anything. They no longer argue to protect their views. They no longer see themselves as victims. And their gentleness makes them a refuge for weary hearts. A man once told me he did not understand why, after moving, his own mountain friends began coming to him to share their struggles, even though no one had ever confided in him before. I told him this always happens. When a person becomes clear inside, they create a safe space around them. Others feel that. They see a level of honesty they have not yet seen in themselves, and they are drawn to it. Not to be taught, but to feel that someone has found the way out. One moment I always remember was when a young man told me that my teachings had changed his life. I told him no words of mine could do that. It was his willingness, his spirit, his inner awakening that changed his life. I only stood beside the doorway. He was the one who opened it, and he was the one who walked through. I want you to understand this. You are never invited to become someone who saves others. You are invited to become someone who reminds them they are not abandoned. You are not asked to change the world. You are asked to keep your light bright enough so that anyone standing in the dark can see a path. And if you have ever crossed a mountain in your life, whether large or small, then you have the right and also the responsibility to pass that truth on. No sermons needed, no theories, no speeches, only presence. The presence of someone who knows that truth never leaves anyone behind. If you meet someone disappointed, tell them you once stood where they stand. If you meet someone afraid, tell them you understand because you carried that fear too. If you meet someone running from themselves, tell them no darkness can withstand light once the light is acknowledged. That is the mission of the one who has moved a mountain. Not to save others, but to remind them that they too can do what you have done. And when they begin to believe they can, their mountain will tremble, just as yours once did. In all the years I have watched people awaken to their inner life, there is one truth I learned only after a long time, a truth I did not fully understand when I was younger. When a mountain in your mind has truly been moved, it cannot return as it once was. People often fear they will fall back into old patterns, that the pain they once surpassed will find its way back, that the goodness they have just touched will slip away. But the law of spirit does not work that way. When truth has replaced illusion, illusion cannot reclaim its old position, because once light has entered a corner of the mind, darkness can no longer re-establish its power. It can only return if you recreate it with old thoughts. But if you stand in truth, it has nowhere to land. I have seen this again and again. Someone comes to me with a fear they have carried for years. They walk through it, slowly, patiently, step by step. And then one day that fear falls away like a door closing from the inside. What fascinates me most is that when they return to tell me about it, they often say they cannot even remember why it once terrified them so deeply. Not because the memory disappears, but because the memory has lost its emotional authority. It becomes nothing more than an old story, like hearing about yourself in a distant lifetime. When the root has been removed, the branches cannot grow back. That is the nature of inner freedom. I remember a man named David, kind and sincere, but carrying a deep sense of unworthiness. He always believed he was standing in the wrong place in life. No matter what he succeeded in, he still felt like an outsider, someone without the right to feel joy, to prosper, to love and be loved. He lived as though a sentence hung over him. When I asked him why, he could not answer. He simply said he had always been that way. That told me his unworthiness did not come from reason, but from an image embedded in his subconscious. I guided him to look directly at that image, to question it, to observe it, instead of submitting to it. Then I helped him replace it with the spiritual truth that he was a part of sacred life and that no one is created with less value than another. He practiced this for weeks, and one morning he came to me with eyes that were completely different. He said something had fallen away from him, like an old coat, finally taken off, something he no longer wished to carry. He said, "I do not know how to explain it, but I feel like I can no longer believe the old thing. It does not convince me anymore." And I knew he had truly moved his mountain. What followed confirmed the law of spirit. In the months after he began receiving opportunities he had never allowed himself to expect. He entered relationships he once thought he did not deserve. He did not force any change. He simply lived from the new image, and the new image shaped a new life. One day, I asked if he feared falling back into his old sense of unworthiness. He smiled and said, "I cannot return, because I am no longer the person who believed that." His words stayed with me for years because they expressed the essence of real transformation. A mountain can return only if you return to being the person who built it. But when you have become someone new, someone who stands in brighter truth, someone who knows the power of the mind, the old image no longer fits you. It has no place to stand. I once thought healing was about overcoming something, but over time, I learned that true healing is becoming someone for whom the old problem cannot survive. It is like raising your inner frequency to a level where old images cannot remain, not because you fight them, but because you rise above them. Truth does not erase the false by battle. Truth makes falsehood disappear by lifting you to a higher plane. When you stand on that higher ground, you can look back and see how long your journey has been, but you no longer carry the emotions that once tied you down. That is the clearest sign a mountain has truly moved. Life no longer rotates around old wounds. The heart no longer closes when that memory passes by. The mind no longer contracts in situations that once terrified you. You do not have to force positive thinking. You simply keep standing in your new place, the place of someone who has seen truth. And truth will never return you to darkness. This is what I want you to understand today. When you have moved a mountain, you do not need to fear its return. The only thing you must avoid is returning to the old self. And you do not avoid that through effort. You avoid it by continuing to live in your new awareness, continuing to think as the new person, continuing to speak, I am from your true nature. Each time you do that, you reinforce a new foundation, and that foundation is strong enough for every old image to fall away. This is what Spirit calls irreversible liberation. It does not come as an explosion. It comes gently, like light slowly filling a room until darkness no longer has a place to stay. In all the years I have walked this path and watched others walk theirs, I came to understand something that took me a long time to grasp fully, something simple, yet profoundly true. A mountain in the mind never disappears by resistance. It disappears only by replacement. I have seen so many people try to push away their pain, erase memories, suppress emotions, or fight the thoughts that frighten them. And the more they fight, the larger the mountain grows. Not because the mountain is real, but because the energy they pour into resisting it is the very thing that keeps it alive. This goes against what we are taught. We are taught that to overcome something we must resist it. But in the law of spirit, to overcome something you must stop feeding it. Whatever you no longer nourish with attention can no longer exist in your consciousness. What you embrace will live. What you refuse to sustain through awareness will dissolve. This is why among all the practices I have taught, there is one I consider the heart of transformation. The practice of immediate replacement. When an old thought rises, you do not fight it. You do not analyze it. You do not ask why it returned. You simply replace it with truth. And you do it at once without giving the mind time to slip back into old pathways. I once guided a woman named Grace who had lived for years with a sense of insecurity. She said that every time she felt unsafe, her first reaction was to push the feeling away, to tell herself she should not feel that way, to pretend she was strong. But the more she tried, the more she felt swallowed from within. I told her she was doing what most people do, fighting darkness with darkness. Because when you fight fear, you use the energy of fear against itself, and that only strengthens it. I told her replacement is the way. If insecurity appears, acknowledge it without judgment, and immediately replace it with spiritual truth. I am peace. I am protected. I am a child of life, and life does not abandon me. She said she did not believe those words at first. I told her belief does not need to come first. Repetition creates belief. No one changes by waiting for belief to appear. People change by moving gently but consistently toward truth. Grace practiced daily. And the miracle did not happen overnight, but it happened steadily. The moments of insecurity came less often, softer, and she said it felt as if a door had opened inside. One day she realized she no longer had to fight fear because fear had nowhere left to attach itself. It had no food. Every time it appeared, it was replaced by truth. I have seen this happen so often that I no longer doubt the law of spirit. The mind does not accept a vacuum. If you do not replace the old thought, it will return like an uninvited guest. But if you replace it with a true image, a true idea, a true word, the mind will adopt a new pattern. And once a new pattern is established, the mountain loses its root. It dissolves like mist. Many people have asked me what the first sign of real transformation is. I always say it is not found in circumstances. It is found in the frequency of your reactions. Where you once reacted with fear, you now react with peace. Where you once shrank back, you now stand firm. Where you once assumed the worst, you now find the light first. That is replacement at work. I remember a man who once asked me a question that made me pause. He said, "If truth is stronger than illusion, why does illusion pull us so strongly?" I told him, illusion is not powerful. We simply lived with it for so long that we mistook it for truth. When truth is unknown, illusion is all you have to hold on to. But the moment you see truth, even once, even for a breath, illusion loses all authority. It is like darkness in a room. It can make the room feel heavy and endless. But when the light is switched on, darkness cannot argue with it. It simply disappears. No struggle, no debate, no force. It just goes. This is exactly what happens with the mountains of the mind. When you replace the old image with truth, you do not need to move the mountain. The mountain dissolves in the light. What I want you to understand today is this. You do not need strength to change your life. You need consistency with truth. And every time an old thought appears, replace it immediately. No delay. No analysis. No asking for permission. Just replace it. You are rebuilding the foundation of your mind, and the new foundation will not allow the old stones to stand. Before we end this chapter, I want to ask you something as an invitation to turn inward. When an old thought appears, do you fight it, or have you begun to replace it with your truth? And today, which will you choose? Thank you for being here and listening with me. As I look back on my own journey and the journeys of the many souls who have come to me over the years, I realize there is a stage every person must pass through if they truly wish to live in lasting peace. It is the stage of inner stabilization, the season in which everything you have learned, discovered, and practiced begins to merge into a new rhythm of being a foundation stronger than anything you once relied upon. I often call this the time of inner shaping. It is no longer the time when you must remind yourself to believe, no longer the time when you must recall every technique, every affirmation, every practice. It is the time when you begin to trust truth, not through effort, but through realizing that truth is already living in you. Years ago, I used to think the goal of the spiritual journey was to find the light. But the farther I traveled, the more I understood that the real goal is to become the one who can hold the light even when the sky grows dark. Anyone can see the light when the sky is clear, but holding it when clouds gather, that is the strength of a soul that has matured. I remember a dear companion on the spiritual path, a gentle man with many years of experience. One day he told me he was exhausted from fighting negative thoughts. I told him he was misunderstanding the nature of spiritual maturity. The one who has not matured fights. The one who is growing begins to observe. But the one who has matured no longer fights or observes. They simply stand in truth, and that stillness dissolves every false image. I told him that, like the sun, truth never has to prove anything. The sun does not chase darkness away. It only needs to be present. He looked at me for a long time and said he never realized peace was not found by doing but by returning. And I told him that was the sign he had entered the stage of inner shaping. When you are no longer afraid of old thoughts returning, when you no longer panic if emotions rise, when you no longer blame yourself for moments of weakness, when you no longer demand that you be strong immediately, when you understand that truth does not arrive through haste, but through patience. This is when real growth begins. I have seen many souls transform not through dramatic moments, but through very small shifts. A person who once lived in fear can now sit still for a few minutes without running away. A person who once reacted fiercely to criticism can now breathe and look within. A person who once believed they needed to tighten themselves to be loved begins to feel a softness toward their own heart. These shifts are so small, others may not notice, but the soul knows. And it is these quiet changes that form the strong framework of inner stability. I remember a woman named Laura. She lived in a near constant state of anxiety. She feared loss, feared change, feared being hurt. When she began to identify the mountain inside her, she said she felt as though she were standing on a slope one misstep away from falling. But she practiced the small steps, replacing old thoughts, seeing through false images, sitting in silence for a few minutes each day, not trying to fix herself, simply observing, acknowledging, and gently placing truth where illusion once lived. One evening she wrote to me. She said she did not know why, but her fear still appeared, only now it no longer overwhelmed her. She said, "I see the fear, but I remain standing." I smiled when I read her words because I knew she had entered the shaping stage. Not the disappearance of fear, but the absence of fear. Not the demolition of the mountain, but the understanding that whether it appears or not, you still stand on the ground of truth. Truth does not demand that you be perfect. It does not demand that you be peaceful at all times. It only reveals that you are no longer controlled by old images. Emotions may rise and fall. Thoughts may appear and fade. Circumstances may shift, but you keep your axis. Like a compass that may be shaken in all directions, yet always returns to the north. This is the stability of spirit. And once spirit has been shaped, no circumstance can truly unroot you. You may sway, but you do not collapse. You may ache, but you do not break. You may slow down, but you do not return to the old version of yourself. What I want you to understand at this stage is that you no longer need to force belief. You no longer need to fight old thoughts. You no longer need to prove anything. You only need to keep living in truth a little each day. A small I am, a single deep breath, a moment of silence, one instance of replacing a false thought, one refusal to return to an old image. These small acts over time build an invisible strength that no mountain can withstand. You do not need speed. You need steadiness, and your steadiness will become the new rhythm of your soul. Once that rhythm forms, nothing can break it. This is the gift Spirit gives to those who are patient with themselves, patient with the journey, patient with truth. And this stage of inner shaping is the gentle bridge leading you toward the deepest completion of transformation that awaits in the final part of your path. When I stand at the end of this journey and look back at the path we have walked together, from the days you were still confused by the invisible mountains around you, to the moments you began to feel a gentle strength rising from within, I see that none of it was meaningless. Every step you took, whether trembling or steady, brought you closer to the truth you have carried since the beginning. I told you at the very start that the mountain was never outside you, it was within you. And now I want to tell you something even more important. The path to your freedom is also within you. No power outside has ever determined the destiny of your soul. Only the voice within can do that. When I was young, I imagined liberation would arrive, like an ending a day when every problem disappeared, every wound vanished, and I could breathe with a heart made new. But life and spirit taught me something different. Liberation is not a destination. It is the awakening that shows you that you never needed to carry any burden at all. Liberation does not come from erasing what happened. It comes from seeing everything through a new light. That light is the Christ within you, the spiritual center from which all good flows, the place you belong and have never been separated from. I have seen people transformed not because life rearranged itself for them, but because they changed their inner position. They no longer stood in fear. They stood in truth. They no longer looked at life through the eyes of someone lacking. They looked through the eyes of someone inheriting sacred life. They no longer walked as those pushed by weight. They walked as those guided by light. And when that shift happens, no mountain in their life, no matter how large, can block them anymore. A man once came to me near the end of his life. He said he had survived many things, from loss and illness to wrong turns and broken roads. But what he was most grateful for was not that he survived, but that he discovered something inside him that never moved. He said, "I once believed I was alone. But the farther I walked, the more clearly I knew that something in me stayed bright, even when every light outside went dark." I told him that was the gift every soul carries from the beginning. It is the voice of the Christ within, the whisper we rarely hear when we are busy listening to the noise of the world. And now, as I write these final words to you, I want you to remember the same truth. You are never alone, not in darkness, not before a mountain, not in the storm of your own thoughts. There is a light in you that never demands, never forces, never judges. It simply waits for you to return. It is not a light you must reach. It is a light you must remember. This journey was never meant to turn you into someone else. It was meant to return you to who you truly are. When you know that when you stand in that truth, you no longer need to beg for anything. You simply speak with the voice of the soul. I am a child of life. I am the light. I am peace. I am one who can say to the mountain in my life, "Move from me," and it must move, because the laws of spirit never conflict with truth. I do not know what your next steps will look like. I do not know what circumstances will come, what doors will open, what mountains will rise. But I know this with certainty. You have changed your inner position in this world, and once you stand in truth, nothing can lead you astray. Hold the peace you have found. Hold the trust you have rebuilt. Hold the voice within you, the voice that never shouts, but is always right, always bright, always steady. Our shared journey ends here, but the light in you does not end. It is only beginning to find its way into every part of your life. And when that happens, you will understand that no mountain is truly immovable before a soul that knows who it is. Thank you for walking this path with me. And from the deepest place in my heart, I bless you as you step forward with a peace the world cannot take from you.